Next on Accident Investigator, a woman dies after her car plunges into the cold waters of a river. But a troubling phone call to the district attorney's office 2 weeks later starts this case moving in an unexpected direction.
For them to call me at the scene, I knew it had to be a complex case. It would take a great deal of investigation.
Then, investigators are called on the scene of a puzzling hit-and-run that has left one man dead underneath the car. But with no witnesses and little road evidence to go on, investigators have more questions than answers.
We had a victim that was underneath the car. Was there anybody else in the car? Were they the sole occupant of the car? Who was driving the vehicle?
And a woman walking on the sidewalk is hit and killed by a car that left the road for no apparent reason.
What I found astonishing about this crash is the car had traveled such a long distance without any input from the driver.
Was there a problem with the car or with the driver? Every year, violent collisions kill 3,000 Canadians and injure another 200,000. But there is no such thing as an accident. Every collision has a story as unique as the people involved. Rusty Haight is a leading authority on accident reconstruction. He trains investigators around the world to read the clues and solve the mysteries.
This truck's a mess. It's rolled over, it's been hit once, probably twice on the side. Can you imagine what it was like inside this truck for the occupants? Well, somebody has to, and that person's studying occupant kinematics. Now, occupant kinematics is all about how people move inside a car. We can use it to analyze seatbelt issues, airbag issues. Now, sometimes it can come into play in more mysterious cases, where even the very nature of the crash is a question.
It's after midnight on an empty stretch of road when a woman notices a man frantically trying to flag her down. She is a little reluctant to stop, but as she draws closer, she can hear the man pleading for help. The man tells her that his car has gone off the side of the road into the river, with his elderly mother still inside. Within minutes, a local trooper arrives on the scene.
It's down there, down there. Where?
But by the time they get back down to the car, the body is nowhere to be found.
He said that he'd spent some 15 or 20 minutes swimming up and down, searching for his mother, trying to get her out of the car.
Please, somebody, as soon as possible.
The man identifies himself as Anthony Salter. At the time of the accident, his elderly mother had recently undergone hip replacement surgery, and Anthony decided to move back into her house to take care of her. When he tells the police about his failed attempt to save his mother, the officer is impressed by his calm behavior and ability to recall all of the details of the incident. At the hospital, a routine checkup shows that Anthony hasn't suffered a single injury from the crash. The doctor is surprised by these findings, and the escorting officer decides to take photos of the examination. The next day, Anthony receives terrible news from the police. Earlier that morning, his mother's body was found washed up on the riverbank. On first blush, Marion Salter's death appears to be a tragic accident. But 2 weeks after the crash, District Attorney Rick Esser receives information that puts a doubt in his mind.
The first phone call that was of great benefit to the investigation was one from an insurance agent.
The agent explains to the DA that Anthony had recently increased his mother's life insurance policy and that he seemed desperate to get his hands on the money. From that moment, Rick decides to completely re-examine the dynamics of the crash.
While we had our doubts about the defendant's story, we wanted to see if the laws of physics demonstrated that is this person a valid suspect or is this likely an accident? That's why we had Joe Hancock get involved.
Crash reconstructionist Joe Hancock usually works in another jurisdiction, but he is quickly identified as the best man for the job.
They wouldn't waste my time, and I wouldn't waste their time. For them to call me at the scene, I knew it had to be a complex case and that it would take a great deal of investigation.
Joe is a specialist among specialists. His field of expertise studies the body's movement inside a vehicle during a crash, a science called occupant kinematics.
In the information that I received from Mr. Esser was that Anthony had advised the investigators that he was driving his mother home from a bridge game. She had just recently had a hip operation and she was under medication. But as they were traveling down the road, he was traveling approximately about 70 miles per hour when he must have fallen asleep. And when he fell asleep, he drifted off the road and he did not wake up until his vehicle was just entering the water.
When Joe begins his reconstruction, 2 weeks have already passed since the accident. Thankfully, local authorities have done a thorough job documenting the scene. To determine whether or not the crash was really an accident, Joe has to analyze the 3 most important factors in occupant kinematics: the crash scene, the vehicle, and the occupant's injuries.
One of the things that Mr. Esser did was show me photographs taken very recently after the crash of Mr. Salter. And immediately I saw that this person had no marks at all on his chest or upper body.
Joe suspects that this photograph might be a highly valuable source of information, but he can't make any assumptions without first looking at the other elements of the crash.
I needed to see the scene. Hello.
Joe heads over to the crash site with the investigator who first mapped the scene. Detective Eddie Verdon shows Joe where Salter claims his car went airborne and jumped into the water at around 110 kilometers per hour.
Looking at the tire tracks and looking at the scene, my experience told me already that this did not happen the way Anthony had described. First of all, if a vehicle did go off a cliff at 70 miles per hour, the vehicle would have almost cleared the river completely and landed on the other side.
But Detective Verdon informs Joe that the vehicle was found in the water only 5 meters from the shoreline. Both men agree on one thing: the car had to be traveling at a much slower speed than Salter claimed.
Now, of course, that does not mean that he is lying. He has been involved in a traumatic crash. He has lost his mother. He could have a hard time remembering correctly. My job is to not really dwell too much of what Anthony said, but what does the physical evidence tell me?
Joe's next stop is the embankment. At the base of the cliff, he can easily see where the vehicle left the cliff and came down. Then, on the edge of the shoreline, hidden between the rocks, Joe makes an amazing discovery.
I noticed that there was debris from a vehicle still in the rocks. And I then identified a headlamp assembly, some molding from the luggage rack, and an antenna from a motor vehicle.
This unexpected find sheds a whole new light on Joe's investigation.
Seeing that, I knew that this vehicle did not actually hit water first, but it hit the base of the cliff first. This area at the base of the cliff was roughly about 7 to 8 feet from the base of the cliff, so the vehicle went off at a very low speed.
This clearly disproves Anthony's recollection of the speed he was traveling, but it still does not contradict his basic version of events. It's entirely possible that the car simply slowed before plunging off the cliff.
We were able to determine that the vehicle left the cliff roughly about 19 miles per hour and hit the bottom of the cliff at 22 miles per hour.
Meanwhile, at the DA's office, Rick Esser receives a phone call from a woman introducing herself as Marion Salter's former private nurse. Mary Ross says she decided to call the DA after she learned about Marion's death in the newspaper. She informs Rick that Anthony had let her go a few months earlier, saying that he couldn't afford her services anymore.
Good afternoon.
According to Ross, Anthony kept complaining that the costs related to his mother's condition were forcing him to postpone his own retirement. Coming up, the investigation takes a shocking new turn when the results from the autopsy are revealed.
Well, when I saw the amount of medication in her system, I then understood that she was basically passed out. She was quite asleep and anything could have happened.
A woman suffers a horrible death when the car she and her son are traveling in drives off the road into a river. Clues at the crash site and interviews with family members have led investigators to suspect her son's version of events. But so far, there is little concrete evidence that would suggest any wrongdoing.
Even if he's lying, does not mean there's anything else about this crash. But I need to do a complete reconstruction.
Then, the autopsy reports come in with shocking findings.
Oh, good, the autopsy.
While confirming that the victim died from drowning, it also shows that there were abnormally high levels of sedatives in her blood.
Well, when I saw the amount of medication in her system, I then understood that she was basically passed out. She was quite asleep and anything could have happened.
This information is a major break in the investigation. While Anthony's mother was taking pain medication for her injured hip, the levels were far beyond the prescribed amount, suggesting that someone may have tampered with her dosage in order to render her unconscious. But despite mounting evidence of foul play, the only thing that can prove it one way or the other are the kinematics of the crash itself. The next step is to analyze the damage to the vehicle.
As I approached the front of the car, I did notice that there was severe front-end damage. It's starting to confirm for me that the vehicle hit nose first.
On the right front of the car, one headlight assembly is missing, while the one on the left-hand side identically matches the model Joe found on the embankment.
I then noticed that the antenna fit into the receptacle for the antenna. And I also noticed that the weather stripping for the roof rack did match up to the crashed vehicle.
Joe next turns his attention to the numerous scratches and bumps found on the car. For this veteran accident investigator, reading those marks is like reading a book. And soon Joe was able to precisely reconstruct the dynamics of the crash.
Well, I also noticed in my observations of the car, scrape marks that were in a circular pattern. So it does confirm to me that the vehicle hit nose first, pivoted on the nose, and fell on the driver's side of the car. And then the scrape marks all along the side, the driver's side, that tells me that the vehicle then slid into the water.
At this point, Joe knows how the crash occurred. But in order to reconstruct the truth, he will need to determine exactly how this squares with the injuries to the occupants. And this is where Marion Salter's autopsy report might be the key.
I saw that Marion had bruisings on both her left and right knees. She had bruises along the shin of her right leg. I then can match those up to contact points in the car. Here and here.
On the passenger side of the car, the history of Marion Salter's final moments is clearly written.
So it looks like her knees came in and hit the dash here. That the ashtray is broken.
All the marks that Joe finds on the passenger side are consistent with Marion's exact injuries. They also indicate that the victim was not wearing a seatbelt. But Joe suspects that the final clue may lay on the driver's side. Since he saw that photograph of Anthony's unharmed chest, Joe has been mystified as to how he could survive an accident of this magnitude virtually unscathed. This is the crux of the entire investigation. If he can prove that Salter was not in the vehicle at the time of the crash, it will be enough to bring charges against him.
If he's not belted in the car, this is what should have happened. He should have hit the steering wheel like a person falling off a two-story building. You would have seen contact points of his body against the steering wheel and the column. We did not see that.
The absence of marks shows that Anthony Salter was certainly not driving this car unbelted when it went over the cliff. But Joe still has to rule out one last possibility that could be raised in Salter's defense. What if Anthony was actually wearing his seatbelt?
So in this case, we don't have any marking from a body on the dash or the steering wheel. Now, in a lower speed crash with the seatbelts, that's what seatbelts are for, and so it should be preventing that kind of contact. But that's going to leave some sort of marks on the body where the belts come across your ribs and across your waist. What we're going to do is an experiment here with the belts and the dummy. We're going to go ahead and take this belt, and we're going to put chalk on it to show where it would mark what's called the D-ring here. And we're going to also have the belt across the dummy and see how he loads that belt in the crash. Let's see how my buddy the dummy did.
Okay, so let's see how my buddy the dummy made out. We're gonna look at the belts, and you can see where the belt actually made contact. You'll see it in the footage. There's a mark on the chest and on the stomach here. And then at the point, and this is exactly right, at the point where the belt went through the D-ring, you can see where it scraped away some of the chalk, and there's actually a little blur, a little smear mark there. That's from the body loading a belt. That's what we expect to see when we have a driver.
In Anthony Salter's car, the driver's seatbelt is still in perfect condition. And with this photo that was taken on the night of the crash, Joe was able to prove that Anthony didn't sustain any bruising.
If he was belted in the car, he should have had these bruises across his shoulder. That did not occur.
We had such a mountain of evidence against him, we decided to place him under arrest. We had no doubt that he was going to be convicted.
During Anthony Salter's trial, Joe Hancock reconstructs his version of the crash for the jury. He leads them step by step through the sordid details of Anthony's intricate plan to murder his mother.
A staged criminal act had taken place.
Late one night, Anthony Salter is driving his 81-year-old mother home from her weekly game of bridge. He most likely offers her a drink that he's heavily spiked with sedative, and within minutes she is asleep. Anthony is familiar with the road and knows the exact moment to pull off where the ground begins to slope toward the small river. He stops just long enough to get out of the car, leaves it in gear, and then watches as the vehicle begins to roll. The car falls over the cliff and hits the embankment, twisting and toppling into the water. As the car slowly sinks out of view with his mother trapped inside, Anthony scrambles down the embankment and splashes muddy water on himself. A few minutes later, he is flagging down a passing motorist for help.
Joe's accident reconstruction was the pièce de résistance, if you want to call it. It's hard to refute the laws of physics.
The jury is quickly convinced, and Anthony Salter is sentenced to life in prison for the premeditated murder of his mother. Coming up, investigators are on a hunt for clues to explain how a man ended up dead stuck underneath a car.
We had a victim that was underneath the car. Was there anybody else in the car? Were they the sole occupant of the car? Who was driving the vehicle?
In car crashes, body movements occur in a split second, literally in the blink of an eye. Did you see where the dummy was in this crash? Did you see how close it got to the steering wheel when the airbag deployed? In a crash test like that, high-speed cameras can document a sequence happening too fast for the human eye. But in the field, there's no high-speed cameras. It's up to the accident investigator to use good observations and make the right deductions, particularly in occupant ejection cases where you're trying to figure out who might have been driving.
It's early on an ordinary Monday morning, and two kids are taking a shortcut on their way to school. But as they move through a densely weeded area, they spot something in the brush that turns out to be anything but ordinary. Minutes later, police secure the scene of a fatal car accident. A vehicle is flipped on its side in a ravine with one man pinned down underneath. Leading this investigation is crash reconstructionist Tom Stoley.
My main role is to gather facts, information, evidence to determine all of the elements surrounding this particular crash. We had a victim that was underneath the car. Was there anybody else in the car? Were they the sole occupant of the car? Who was driving?
As officers search the area for other ejected occupants, Tom notices the overgrown weeds and realizes that the car is barely visible from the roadway.
The first thing that struck my mind was, how long had this been there? It could have been hours, it could have been days.
A paramedic confirms that the man is dead and has been probably for a few hours. But taking the corpse away at this stage could potentially disturb crucial evidence.
I decided to keep the body in place until we had a chance to really go over the scene and gather everything we could.
There are several items strewn around the site. A couple of empty beer bottles and unopened packs of cigarettes litter the area. Further up the ravine, a baseball cap has also been thrown from the car. Inside the vehicle, the contents of a wallet are spread out, and police quickly find a license that reveals the identity of the victim. The name Alex Trevino is well known to the police. He lives with his uncle, Gene Mitchell, and their home is regularly visited by officers answering calls related to public disturbances and drunken brawling. Alex and Gene are rarely seen without each other, and around town everyone knows who they are. The car is licensed to Gene, but a quick check shows that Alex is registered as a second driver. As police try to contact Gene Mitchell, Tom directs his attention to the physical evidence on the roadway. Analyzing a pair of tread marks left on the asphalt, he is able to visualize the events leading up to the crash.
As it enters the curve, it goes into a side skid. It's rotating. It's where the rear tire crosses over the path of the front tire. That's why they get wider here.
Such traces of rotating motion lead Tom to one conclusion. The car entered the curve traveling way too fast.
Every curve, every bend in the roadway has what's called a critical curve speed. Now that's a speed that you can't go faster than and still stay on the curve. Now if we know the radius of the turn and something about how sticky the road is, friction, we can actually calculate that speed. So what we want to do is stay inside of that speed. Now we're going to do an experiment here. I'm going to drive through this curve to show how fast we can go and still stay on the curve. So there it is. It doesn't take more than about 5 miles an hour over that critical curve speed, and you're out of control. Those yellow signs, they're there for a reason. Someone's already done the calculation for you. Follow the direction.
Obviously, the driver who caused these tire marks wasn't following directions at all.
I was able to determine the speed of the vehicle, and it was in the neighborhood of 61, 62 miles per hour. More than 30 miles per hour, the speed limit.
It's also clear that in order to shear off a utility pole like that, there had to have been a massive impact. As an accident investigator, Tom's role is to make sure that every aspect of the crash matches up with his observations. The car's left front and back wheel rims are broken, probably due to it sliding sideways. And the damage at the rear end of the vehicle is consistent with slamming into the utility pole. But as Tom finally authorizes the removal of the victim's body from the scene, he is surprised to see that Alex's body shows no sign of injury.
It was fairly undamaged for this type of collision.
Tom then receives confirmation that no other victims, dead or alive, have been found in the surrounding area. Naturally, this would suggest that Alex was traveling alone and that he was the one driving the vehicle. But Tom has his doubts.
Well, one of the first things that drew my attention was the victim was clutching a pack of cigarettes in his hand, and the driver was trying to steer through the curve, trying to steer back onto the roadway. How do you do that with a pack of cigarettes in your hand?
Tom has a growing suspicion that someone else was driving the vehicle. He requests an immediate check on the crash victims recently admitted to nearby hospitals and starts looking for clues that may suggest there was a second occupant in the car.
I think there's somebody else.
Studying the new pack of cigarettes more closely, Tom wonders if it may have been purchased just moments before the crash.
It appeared to be a fresh pack of cigarettes, like he was in the process of opening them at the time.
Following his instincts, Tom decides to check out a convenience store located just half a mile from the scene, on the exact same road the car was coming from.
That would seem like a logical spot that they may have stopped to purchase these cigarettes.
In an amazing twist, the store clerk tells Tom that Alex Trevino had indeed been in the store earlier to buy cigarettes. And he was not alone. Screening the surveillance camera footage, Tom is able to locate an image showing that Alex Trevino walked into the store with another man. The clerk knows them both well. He identifies Alex's companion as his uncle and buddy, Gene Mitchell.
It was a great piece of evidence because it puts them together just before the crash. And the other important piece of information on the video was Gene Mitchell's wearing a baseball cap.
A baseball cap identical to the one Tom found on the crash scene.
It places Gene Mitchell at the scene and also helps pinpoint the time of the crash.
With this new piece of evidence, Tom knows that a few minutes after 4:42 that morning, Gene Mitchell was riding with his nephew Alex Trevino when their vehicle violently left the road due to excessive speed. His next task will be to determine who was driving. And since alcohol seems to be involved, the answer to that question could lead to serious consequences for the surviving victim. Coming up, Tom Stoley relies on injury analysis to determine which one of the two occupants of the car was behind the wheel during the crash.
They were substantial injuries. Most of them were localized to the left side of his body. They were definitely from some sort of car crash.
Investigator Tom Stoley has just discovered that an accident victim found dead on the roadside earlier that morning was actually traveling with his uncle just moments before the crash. But the uncle is nowhere to be found. On his way back to the police station, Tom receives a call from dispatch. He learns that Gene Mitchell has been admitted to a hospital just a few miles from the crash site and is being treated for multiple injuries, including what police call road rash. Tom requests that a blood sample be taken from the suspect and rushes to the hospital.
I want to get the blood as soon as possible.
Road rash is a term that we use in medicine to describe an abrasion. Oftentimes when someone falls on asphalt, they fall off a bicycle, they get ejected from a motor vehicle accident, you will see the skin abraded. Road rash is something that we see very, very frequently.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Investigator Stoley. I'm here to meet with one of my colleagues.
Oh yeah, just right there.
At the ER entrance desk, Tom meets with a patrolling officer who tells him that he'd found the suspect about an hour before.
Hey, stop!
Mitchell had been shirtless and obviously intoxicated, yelling and wandering in the middle of the street. When the responding officer went to talk to him, he quickly noticed severe abrasions across the left side of Mitchell's head, leg, arm, and chest.
He claimed that he had been the victim of an assault. He had been beaten up by one or two other people.
Mitchell's wounds did not appear consistent with this type of assault. There were no bruises or similar injuries you'd expect to result from an attack. But the injuries were serious enough for the officer to take Mitchell to the hospital. Next, Tom interviews the ER physician handling Gene Mitchell's case. Dr. Bill Marciano tells him that both of his patient's clavicles are fractured. Mitchell also has 6 broken ribs, a punctured spleen, a collapsed and contused left lung, and many cuts and scrapes.
They were substantial injuries. Most of them were localized to the left side of his body. They were clearly not injuries from an assault. They were definitely from some car crash.
Injury analysis is a key element in accident reconstruction. And as the doctor enumerates Mitchell's injuries, Tom continues the reconstruction of the crash in the same way as you would build a brick wall, piece by piece.
The way the vehicle left the roadway, one of the first things it did was impacted a utility pole near the left rear of the car. And it would be reasonable that the person sitting in the driver's seat would be slammed against the left side of the car and sustain some fairly major injuries on their left side. That would account for the broken ribs on the left side, the ruptured spleen, and the various other internal type injuries he received. Yeah, certainly.
Gene Mitchell's blood test results confirm that he was highly intoxicated on his arrival at the hospital. If Tom is able to prove that he was behind the wheel at the time of the crash, Mitchell will certainly be facing some serious criminal charges. Dr. Marciano understands the situation and he authorizes Tom to interrogate his patient.
When I spoke to Gene, he gave a couple of conflicting versions of the cause of his injuries and his whereabouts that night. Finally, he did admit that he was with Alex Trevino and that he was in the vehicle. However, he wouldn't say that he was driving. He stated that Alex was driving.
All the physical evidence so far suggests that Mitchell may be lying. But Tom knows that if the case goes to court, he will need all aspects of the crash scene to match up with his reconstruction. And one mystery remains. Why would Alex Trevino's body suffer so little damage in the accident? Back at the scene, Tom starts looking for physical evidence that may help him put that last brick in the wall.
The driver's side window is broken. All the other window glass is intact. The passenger would have had to been ejected out the driver's side window, as well as the driver.
This single observation solves the mystery of Alex's undamaged body and allows Tom to finalize his reconstruction of the events that led to Alex Trevino's untimely death. In the middle of the night, Gene Mitchell is driving back home from a bar with his nephew Alex Trevino. Severely intoxicated, Gene's reflexes are highly affected, and his car enters a curve at more than 50 kilometers per hour faster than the curve's critical speed limit. Unable to complete the turn, the vehicle skids to the left side of the road and hits a utility pole before it starts overturning in grassy terrain. Gene Mitchell is crushed up against the left side of the car, and his body absorbs all the violent impact. In the process, he acts as a virtual shield protecting Alex Trevino from any bodily harm. After the first roll, Mitchell's body is propelled through the driver's side window and lands violently on the ground. But by the time Alex passes through the already broken window, the car has lost some of its momentum, and he lands softly on the long weeds. Unfortunately, a moment later, the car rolls on top of him, squeezing his body into the spongy turf.
The cause of death was positional asphyxia.
Positional asphyxia occurs when the patient can't get oxygen into his lungs. Sometimes that is due to a heavy object on the chest, so the lungs can't expand.
The autopsy later reveals that Alex Trevino suffered only 2 broken ribs and would have easily survived the crash if the vehicle had not rolled on top of him. Gene Mitchell pleads guilty to criminal vehicular operation, resulting in the death of Alex Trevino. He was sentenced to 4 years confinement plus 5 years probation. Coming up, a woman is hit by a car that seemed to have left the roadway for no apparent reason.
So in a crash like this, you start thinking about different scenarios, how the crash could have occurred, what may have caused it. Was there a mechanical problem with the car? Was he hit by another vehicle that caused him to lose control? And the other possibility is he swerved to avoid something in the roadway.
The human condition often plays a role in crashes. For younger drivers, we perceive them to be reckless, inexperienced, driving too fast. It's a fact of life for those of us aging. We know our eyesight isn't what it used to be, and our reaction time has slowed down a little bit. Now, any one of these factors can play a role in a crash. Today, it's Frank Carson's job to figure out if one did.
On a hot, muggy afternoon, Jane Balfour is busy working in her garden when the sudden sound of metal hitting metal jars her out of her thoughts. She looks up just in time to see a vehicle sideswipe the neighbor's car and continue on down the street towards a parking lot. Jane rushes back into the house and calls 911. When she comes back out, she sees that the car has actually come to a stop, but not before having hit a pedestrian. A passing jogger stops to help the injured woman while Jane checks on the driver of the car.
Okay, my name is Jane.
He's an older man, and while he doesn't seem to have any external injuries, he's only semi-conscious and his breathing is slow. Medics arrive on the scene within minutes and rush both individuals to the hospital. Frank Carson, traffic reconstructionist, is called in to head up the investigation.
After the officer briefed me, I started looking around, and the only thing I could see was the driver's car hit a parked car. They were still stuck together. Garbage can had been knocked over. And, of course, the area where the pedestrian had fallen down after she had gotten hit. And that's all I had to go on at that point.
Frank's job is a difficult one. He will need to determine exactly why this car left the road and hit the passing pedestrian. His findings could have serious ramifications for the driver, victim, and their families. As a first step, he runs a check on the car's registration, and the owner is identified as Mr. Harold Carlisle, a 68-year-old local man.
He's over there.
Frank then turns his attention to the crash site.
I went back down the road from the direction that it looked like his car came to look for other marks on the roadway.
But there is no roadway evidence of skidding or any other signs of braking.
What I found astonishing about this crash is the car had traveled such a long distance without any input from the driver.
Frank measures over 170 meters of the driverless tire marks.
The car went a long distance, so he had to have been traveling at a pretty decent speed. It's a 25-mile-an-hour zone, and we were able to calculate from the marks on the roadway and other evidence that he was probably going at least 50 miles an hour at the beginning of this whole scenario to be able to travel that far, hit the curbs, hit the pedestrian, and still have enough energy to hit a parked car.
Frank's at a loss. He can't begin to explain the bizarre crash. There's just no evidence to give him a clue as to what might have happened here.
So in a crash like this, you start thinking about different scenarios, how the crash could have occurred, what may have caused it. Was there a mechanical problem with the car? And the other possibility is he may have done what some people do and confuse the brake pedal with the gas pedal.
Accident investigators find themselves working on cases where the driver has mistaken the brake and the accelerator pedal. It may seem surprising, but it happens, and it can lead to disastrous results. Can you imagine being on the freeway and a big truck in front of you slowing, and instead of going for the brake, you go for the accelerator? That's not a good thing. Now, a lot of times when this happens is you find a certain type of tire mark, an acceleration scuff, and accident investigators are trained to identify that. It's different than a braking tire mark. But here, Frank doesn't have either. So what's he gonna do? How's he gonna solve this case?
The vehicle also shows no damage that would suggest Carlisle had been run off the road or involved in an earlier collision. Next, Frank requests that the car be taken back to the garage for a full forensic inspection.
So the scene information and what the witnesses told me didn't help a lot to answer some of the questions we had. We have a car that's out of control, and we have a pedestrian. And did the pedestrian maybe accidentally step in front of the car? That's something we don't know about right now. And the best way to find that out is going to be to go to the hospital and talk to Mr. Carlisle, see what he might remember.
The case is starting to rely heavily on Stephanie Platt and Harold Carlisle. Coming up, Frank rushes to the hospital in hopes that he can gather more clues.
These are all questions that I have to try and answer, and the best way to answer that is talk to Mr. Carlisle at the hospital.
Mr. Harold Carlisle, a 68-year-old man, is involved in a dramatic accident when he loses control of his vehicle and hits Stephanie Platt. Both Mrs. Platt and Mr. Carlisle are rushed to the emergency room. Accident reconstructionist Frank Carson is heading up the investigation. Testimonies and physical evidence show Mr. Carlisle's car left the road, but it appears that he never tried to regain control before slamming into Mrs. Platt.
So while I'm driving the hospital, I have a couple scenarios to run through my head. What happened to Mr. Carlisle to make him do this? Was he maybe impaired by drugs or alcohol? Did he have kind of medical crisis? Or maybe he passed out?
Or could a mechanical failure have caused the crash? Frank hopes to speak with Harold and Stephanie, the only two people who know exactly what happened. But when Frank finally arrives at the hospital, neither patient is in any condition to talk. Harold Carlisle has been heavily sedated, his body having gone into shock, and Stephanie Platt is still in the operating room undergoing surgery to save her life. Her leg was so severely injured by the impact that it had to be amputated, and her other internal injuries are massive. She suffered serious blunt force trauma.
Blunt force trauma at moderate to high speed is a very dangerous situation for the patient. The risk of serious injury goes up astronomically. You assume very serious injury in multiple organ systems.
The doctors have been able to run a routine blood test on Harold Carlisle, and the results come back negative for alcohol, another dead end. But as Frank turns to leave the hospital, he is flagged down by Tom Carlisle, Harold's son. Tom tells Frank that he'd been expecting his father that evening for dinner. When he hadn't shown up, he tried calling and eventually drove over to his dad's house. He was surprised to find the Meals on Wheels service breakfast still in the bag and untouched on the kitchen table. Frank asks Tom whether his dad was on any medication or suffered from any medical problems. Tom then reveals a very important fact. His father is an epileptic.
You know, when I think of somebody having a seizure, I think of a little thunderstorm inside the brain. You have all these little electrical impulses like popcorn going off in the brain, but they're all going down a pathway, different pathways all over to get from your brain down to your eyes, to your ears, to your mouth, down to your legs, your arms. And what happens with a seizure is there's an abnormal electrical impulse in the brain, like a spark. And all of a sudden, that spark can trigger other sparks.
Frank learns that Harold Carlisle had been on the same prescription drugs for about 15 years, and as far as Tom knows, has never suffered any side effects.
Tom didn't know the type of medication, but he was able to give me an important clue. He gave me the personal physician, Mr. Carlisle, so that's a person I can follow up with and get a little more detail out of.
Frank gets a call from dispatch reporting that the mechanical inspection revealed no faults or problems with the car, and the only significant damage was sustained in the final collision. While the crash scene evidence has now been exhausted, the medical lead is all Frank has left. His next stop is Harold's personal physician, Dr. Bronson. Dr. Bronson confirms that she met with Mr. Carlisle only a month before to check on his medication. Mr. Carlisle indicated that he hadn't been suffering from any seizures or side effects. She is certain the medication would prevent him from having a seizure, provided he'd been taking the prescribed dosage. That's the next question Frank has to answer.
You have to be very careful if you are self-medicating. And the reason for that is missing a dose of medication may be just as serious as taking too much of the medication. And when you're doing that and you get behind the wheel of a car, then you may put yourself at risk, but more often, you may put others at risk.
Frank recalls a snippet from the conversation he'd had with Tom Carlisle about the Meals on Wheels breakfast sitting untouched on the kitchen table. According to Tom, his father always took his medicine along with his first meal of the day.
The morning of the accident, his father hadn't eaten his breakfast. So there's a possibility that since he didn't eat his breakfast, he didn't take his medicine like he was supposed to.
Frank immediately calls the hospital and speaks to the ER doctor. He asks that the blood test include the level of anti-seizure meds in Harold Carlisle's system.
The blood test results could show something very important. If Mr. Carlisle's level of his medication, his bloodstream was too low or non-existent, he could have had a blackout.
The next morning, Frank returns to the hospital. He's advised that Mr. Carlisle is coming around and is now alert enough to be interviewed.
I asked him what I asked most people involved in accidents. Do you remember anything about the crash?
Crash yesterday. Can you tell me what happened?
Well, the last thing he remembers was hitting a curb or a bump. Next thing he remembers, he's sitting in his car, someone's knocking on the window, and they're putting a mask on his face, and the EMS personnel are there to treat him.
Frank is astonished. Harold Carlisle doesn't remember anything about the crash or the moments leading up to it. That means his car was traveling driverless for a period of time at roughly 80 kilometers an hour. Again, this information fits with the possibility of a seizure, but Frank needs more information.
And I asked him if he remembers the morning, if he had his breakfast. And after saying he didn't remember, he admitted that no, he didn't eat his breakfast. And then I asked him if there's a possibility maybe he didn't take his medication, because he usually takes with his breakfast. And after talking about that for a moment, he finally admitted that no, he didn't take his medication that morning like he was supposed to.
The blood test confirms Mr. Carlisle's admission. The level of anti-seizure meds suggests a period of approximately 12 to 16 hours without medication. Harold Carlisle goes on to admit that he often didn't take his medications as prescribed. Rather, he took them according to his own schedule. This is not the first time that Frank has heard such a confession. He used to be a medic and isn't surprised.
On long-term medication, you're supposed to maintain a therapeutic level of the drug in your system to manage your condition. And if you take your medication on a regular basis, your medication levels go up and down, just like a roller coaster. And that's not a good way to manage your medical condition.
Tragically, Harold Carlisle's failure to adhere to his dosage requirements costs Stephanie Platt her life. Doctors are simply unable to repair damage to her spleen and liver, and Stephanie Platt dies 24 hours after arriving at the hospital.
This is a sad case for the family, certainly of Miss Platt, who was killed in the crash, but also for Mr. Carlisle. He's going through his life managing his condition without knowing that the way he is managing it, by not taking medication properly, could cause a problem like this.
With the final piece of the puzzle in place, Frank can now recreate the tragic events that led to a young woman's untimely death. After failing to take his medication that morning, 68-year-old Harold Carlisle suffers an epileptic seizure and blacks out behind the wheel. His car careens out of control, hops a curb, and slams into pedestrian Stephanie Platt. The violent force of the collision causes massive internal injuries that ultimately claim her life. Frank meets with the state attorney's office to review the case and decide what, if any, charges will be brought against Harold Carlisle.
I met with the state's attorney's office to review the case, and Mr. Carlisle could have been facing motor vehicle manslaughter charges, but because of the circumstance of the case, it was decided not to prosecute him criminally, and Ms. Platt's family decided not to pursue any civil litigation.